Welcome, and thank you very much for coming. This is a conversation with Léonard Lassalle about The Source of Life, which is a book he wrote a couple of years ago now, which explores his life and his practice of the spiritual training known as Latihan Kejiwaan. And just to briefly introduce you all, Léonard was born in France in 1937 to an English mother and a French North African Jewish father. When I do this, I'm quoting the book. After an unorthodox childhood, he was in London studying and met Jean Orton, now known as Melinda, who is here with us today, and they had 7 children together. Shortly, yeah, that's really Shortly after meeting Jean, the two of them took up this spiritual training, and the book Source of Life is, I would say, I should say that I'm not so good. I've read the book and I was very interested in it. And The Source of Life almost demystified the Subud and the Latihan practice to me, because I was curious about it and had never made much headway in really finding out what was going on with it. But this book explains Léonard's experience and how it impacted, and still impacts, no doubt, on his daily life, and all the things that have happened to him. So we're going to talk about this book now, and I'm going to ask Léonard some questions. After a while, we can open the discussion up, and if anyone has any questions to ask Léonard, this evening is your chance. So we'll push on. So my first question to you, because there may be people in this audience who are not familiar with Subud, is whether you could explain what Subud means and maybe what the Latihan is briefly.
Okay, I'm going to be extremely, and forgive me for this, I'm going to be very basic. And to explain Subud, I think my way to explain is to go back to the essence of each one of us, but the essence of everything that's been created on the planet. You take an acorn, it doesn't look like an oak tree, but it has within everything it needs to develop into an oak tree. You take a mouse, it's got in it everything it needs, its curiosity and everything else, to actually become a mouse. You take a lizard, he will know when to come out when the sun is out, and he'll go under the stone when there is rain. The snail will do the opposite. And you take a baby, you take a little child. When he's born, he's a bit like the snail or like the lizard. He hasn't got words. So he's following the inner program, because he's born whole. And Subud means whole, it means complete. But complete in movement, complete in the chaos of the universe, in expansion. But it means whole, it means you can't add anything to it, or you can't take anything away from it. It's whole. So the experience of Subud is very simple. It's before the word. If you take, again, go back to a little baby. I was holding her yesterday, she's over there, and she's a lovely little child, but she can't speak. And she was looking, and she was looking, and she was looking. And I could never say or dare to say, this child is not conscious. That child was fully conscious, looking at me and seeing through me. And I loved her for that, because there was no resistance in her wanting to know the world. And that's because it's before the word. It's before the moment. Each word that we use contains
emotions. It can't be helped. The mother is in the kitchen, she's washing up, and she's singing a lovely song, and there is a word in there, and the child feels elated, and that word makes the child feel light. And then maybe in another family, the mother is swearing at something because she's angry, and she uses a similar word. It could be the word of God. Some people swear with it. So that word will have a different meaning. It's like a boat. It contains a different feeling. So if we go before the word, the child is following very freely the program that's inside. That's why they walk so quickly. That's how they learn how to speak as well. It's because it's playing inside, and they just follow. So when we talk about the spiritual experience, or practice rather than of subud, it is to do with that. It's going before word. No words need to be spoken, because we ask from the individuals who want to connect to this, we ask not to think, because the word goes to the mind, or often to the heart as well, because it contains feeling. And we ask them to abandon all this, so as to be completely free in awareness, just like the little baby over there, and just in waiting. So the baby is there in waiting, and suddenly he goes like that, and he feels something, so he looks, and then he follows his hand. And then he hears a sound, so he's looking for the sound, and he's developing from what's inside. And what we do when we do this exercise, which is a practice we do roughly 2 or 3 times a week for half an hour, it's to actually do just simply that. It's to let go completely and let whatever comes from inside out. So it's a training, like a child is trained. Every day the child is trained by his wants, and his passion makes him move about. Well, in this Latihan, we are trained from the inside. In other words, from the initial program inside. So at the beginning, when we start, we have no idea what it's all about. We don't know, we don't understand it. There's no way we can understand it, because it comes from before the thinking, before the mind. So the mind has no access, and if it tries to access, it actually blocks the way. So as soon as the mind interferes to try to understand, that thing stops. So there we are.
But how do you let go of your mind?
That
and
is that is the miracle.
Okay.
Is that, and I can talk from my experience, and it's all in here.
Yeah.
It actually, if you trust it, it happens. In other words, we have. I'm talking from my experience only. I'm not talking for anybody. Just to share with you, we've got within ourselves our whole universe. Within our own universe, there is the darkest, the blackest of all, and there is the most luminous. And I have learned through this practice to transcend. In other words, to let my consciousness move freely in that space. And of course, I keep it nearly all the time in the positive. But sometimes I go down into the negative, because it's important to know about it, to understand others. But it's not a place one needs to dwell too long. And it has, through the years of practice, my consciousness has expanded. It doesn't go from here to there, but it expands from the center, where the consciousness is, and it's wider and wider and wider and wider. So it's very simple. It's all in us, you see. It's not from outside. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to teach. There's no teaching, of course. There can't be teaching, because it's already there. The program is already there. And now, it's only in the last maybe 10 years or so, but when I look at all of you and I look at people I don't know, I see the beautiful holiness of each individual, because it's like a diamond. Everybody is so beautiful, because they have that, they're not always aware of it, and they suffer and they look like this and so on, but inside there is all that potential, it's just waiting. And why it's not fulfilling itself out is because they're not aware that it's there.
So can you talk us through how you first became aware of this potential, as you mention it in here?
Yes.
How did you
well,
feel?
everybody's got a road that leads them somewhere. And my road was the arts. I'm a painter and an artist. And I studied in Paris then after Paris, I went to study in London. I had 2 years at the Central School of Arts and Crafts. And at the age of about 15, 16, I became interested. My mother was anti-religion. She never mentioned the word God to us, or Jesus, or anything like this. She had a father who had been a priest in England, and she suffered from the Bible and the stick, and she thought she'd never talk to her children about that. So when I asked her the first question to tell me about God, she was angry with me. She said, "Where do you get that word from?" So I said, "Well, they've talked to me about it at school." She said, "Well, who?" I said, "Well, I don't know, they're going to church." So I asked them about it. And I said, "Mummy, why did Jesus walk on the water?" She said, "Who's put all this into your head?" And so I had no religious education whatsoever. And when I started reading, I met somebody who was interested in Gurdjieff work. And showed me a book by Ouspensky and another one, then Beelzebub. I got one of Gurdjieff's books. And there was a kind of logic. It's very logical and it has a lot of sense. It's very orderly. And it attracted my character. I'm an orderly person. So I followed that for a while and I started reading it. And then at the art school, I was looking around one day, a bit late, I came in, and there was the most beautiful model sitting there. And she was so inspiring. I took my canvas and I started my painting. I was vibrating all over. And then we went down for 11s in the Central School. There's a place where there is 11s to have a cup of tea. It's an English habit to have tea at 11s. And I saw her sitting by herself. So I went up to the table and I said, "Do you mind if I sit at this table with you?" And she said, "No." And then I asked her, I said, "What do you do when you're sitting down? Because you're looking as if you're doing something inside." Because all the models I'd seen in Paris, and they tend after a while to somnoler. What's somnoler in French, in English?
Glaze
they
over.
fall asleep. They lose. They disconnect, and they tend to disconnect. But I saw at the time she was called Jean, she was completely connected, and something was happening inside. So I was interested, and I asked her, and she's sitting over here. And I asked her, and she said, "Oh, nothing. I do nothing." So I said, "Yes, we do something." She said, "No." And after the third time, she said, "Well, if you really insist, I feel my toes, I feel my legs, I feel my body, while I count up to 100, and at the same time, I count from 100 to 0. So I said, "Gee, this is amazing." I was very impressed. I thought, I can't keep my consciousness more than 15 seconds, and then I'm somewhere else. And she was doing that. And I said, "But that sounds like a Gurdjieff exercise." She said, "Yes, it is." So suddenly we had a rapport. And the story goes on, you'll see it's in the book. But we ended up with 7 children. But what was interesting is that I said, "Where do you do this work?" And she said, "Oh, it's a place called Coombe Springs." So I said, "And where is that?" And she told me it was in Kingston, on Thames. And then several days later, the ones who read the book will see, in June of 57, I was at night, in the middle of the night, it was 2:30 in the morning, sleeping in Belsize Park Avenue. I had a flat there with a friend, and he wasn't there that night, which was very lucky. And I heard hootering outside, and I thought, "What's that hootering?" And up came Jean. Now she's called Melinda, but at the time she was called Jean. In French, we pronounce it as Jean. And Jean in France, everybody thought I was a gay character because I was with a man. So Melinda, it makes it much easier. So anyhow, the car hooters and so on, and come up Jean and Peter, Lambert Gibbs, later on, your man. And he comes up with her, and they're completely elated. I mean, their eyes are shining, and they're like this, and I think they've been on drugs, or they've been smoking something, or maybe they've been drinking, and I couldn't smell any alcohol, and I've got a good nose, I couldn't smell anything, and they were very high, and they said something amazing happened. And they told me about this experience. And they had started what they called at the time the contact. And indeed, it is like a kind of contact, because you let go of your heart, of your mind, and you just presence, and then it starts.
What do you contact?
So, but you make, that means your consciousness, instead of being conscious of your wants and your needs, of your emotions, you go beyond, just before that, but you're still conscious. But that consciousness is in waiting for the orders of the inner program.
So you're contacting a latent consciousness?
That's right.
Right.
That's right. You're contacting back to really what you left when you were a child.
Oh, so
I tell the story in my
pre-word.
book, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I kept this, we could call it a spiritual practice even as a child, because I would sing and dance freely, and I used to feel terribly free and a wonderful feeling, until one day some children saw me doing that by myself, and they embarrassed me terribly in the front of everybody and said, what are you doing? Are you mad? Are you crazy? And so on. And I closed it all up. And what's interesting, that when I started this spiritual exercise, I reconnected to that. What a wonderful feeling.
Thank you. So you touched on Jean's name changing to Melinda. I know that you say in the book you used to be called Francois. There's a really great passage in the book where you explain how Bapak found you your name. Would you maybe tell us something about who Bapak is?
Yeah, well, okay.
And also about how you got your new name?
Yeah, it's very important, of course, because everything has a source of life. And for me, this Indonesian man called Muhammad Pak Subuh, we call him Bapak, which means grandfather. He brought to the West, he was invited to Coombe Springs to come and bring this connection back to the soul. And of course, the people who were studying Gurdjieff were very much in their heads, because the Gurdjieff demands concentration, it demands effort, it demands all kinds of things where you use your passion to actually concentrate. Bapak comes to Coombe Springs, he's invited with his family, and he says, I brought you the contact, you're going to connect to your inner feelings, but for that you must leave aside your heart and your mind. Just let this go by quietly, and you will find the connection will come.
What did you think when he said that to you? Because that's
I
quite
thought,
an unusual
well, I
thing
thought
to
it's
say.
not possible.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not possible because I lived in my mind, and I'm a terribly rational person. I mean, I really am a rational person. So I thought this is not possible. But then Melinda started before me, 3 months. But I still went to see her. I loved her very much, and we spent many nights together, and it was great. But as she was developing, and she was terrifically enthusiastic about this thing she'd found, because it was so different and made her so free with her being, that she would mention it and talk about it. Myself, I suddenly realized that although I thought I knew everything, I was brought up on a desert island and very much in nature and so on, and I thought I was very stable, but suddenly I realized that when I looked at a policeman, I was a bit weary whether I was in the right place or if I was doing the right thing. If I saw a pretty girl walk ahead of me, I was there. If I talked to my grocer lady, I would talk differently from what she looked like. I've noticed that in myself. If she was very pretty, I would think about other things. If she was not so pretty, I would think about buying the melons or the peaches or whatever.
Okay.
So I realized that my me, was always changing. It wasn't stable. It wasn't always the same. And I noticed with Melinda that she had something, there was a happiness that was permanent there. And I asked myself a question, which got me into a deep kind of crisis. I said, if you came to die now, which eye would you be in? Would you be the eye that looks at the girl? Would you be the eye that adores his mama? Or would you be the eye who is with the grocer lady? Or would you be the eye who is frightened of the policeman? Wow, what a thing to say. So I scratched my head, and I suddenly realized I didn't know who I was. What is permanent? Where am I? And I couldn't answer it. And I really went down into a crisis at the central. Other students, saw me and said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, I don't know who I am." "What do you mean you don't know who you are? You're François." At the time it's called François. And I wasn't. I was I felt I said yes, but I'm always changing. I'm never permanent. So I went to see Melinda one evening, and I met somebody at Coombe Springs in that place. He was called Pierre Elliott, who spoke French. So he said, "Comment ça va?" And I said, "Pas terrible, not so good." And he said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know who I am." So he said, "Well, that's interesting." He only had a very few words. He had his hands behind his back, pondering with his head like this, and he said, "If you like, start Latihan, this spiritual exercise. You can start it tonight. I'll arrange it for you." So he said that, and I said in myself, "Never, I don't want to start this. They're all crazy in this place, but they don't know what they're doing, they're singing and so on, but what's all that about? I don't want that." But I found myself say yes. And I said, "Why have you said yes?" I had this inner battle. I found that something in me had said, "Yes, I'd like to do that," but my heart and mind, my ego and all that just did not want it. I wanted to stay in control. And I had the wrong understanding about control. Control from the wants is one thing, and control from the soul is another. But that I discovered later on.
Yeah.
So to go back to the name,
yeah, the name.
I call that a glass.
Yeah.
And it's called the glass, okay? And everybody knows that it reflects that. With people, it's more difficult. Each one of us, that's my understanding today. I didn't understand that before, but now I come clearly. There is a vibration created by each one of us with light, with dark. Yes, there's a vibration comes out. There's a vibration of the feeling, but there is as well a vibration of sound. And the universe is full of sound. There's a lot of sound there. And when humans feel they're playing sound, they're actually mirroring what's happening in the cosmos, in their cosmos. It's quite fascinating. So there is a vibration for each one of us. And I had an experience with a grandson, and they couldn't find a name for their grandson. So I went very quiet inside, and I traveled out inside, very, very wide, completely awake. And in there, I suddenly had a feeling. I saw a kind of cosmic wind coming. It was an extraordinary experience. And then I heard sound. And I saw colors. And there were orange and pale green and a mauve and a grey, these colors. And these colors, I saw them coming towards me. It was very, very, very soothing. And I felt the quality of that child. He was just born. And I was in America and the child was in England.
Can I just check with you? Were you doing spiritual training? Was this an example of a spiritual training exercise, or was this just something you do now because
you're quite
so
right. How did I come to feel that?
Yeah.
I said, okay. I stood with. I had a friend who was with me. I said, they asked me to find a name for the child.
Yeah.
The thing to find the name, I don't want it to find it for my heart because I like this woman or this man. I don't want to find it from my head because it sounds good or because it means this or it means that. I want to find from the soul point of view. In other words, from the whole, from the subud point of view.
From the subud point of view.
The subud point of view means the whole. So all we do is to just let go completely, and I let go completely, and my consciousness grew, and then I went into this space, and in that space I saw these colors, and I heard these sounds, and then I heard the sound coming, and it came to Melvin, and I said Melvin, and I understood, and my hair went on my head like this, because I felt the quality of that child. It was very, very subtle and very refined. So there we go. That name was Melvin. But I was terrified to tell my son-in-law that it was Melvin, because my son-in-law used to be in love with one of my daughters before, and she had a boyfriend called Melvin. and I was terrified to tell him. I thought if I tell him, what? But then I said, but
Bad luck.
I have to be one. With my receiving, so it is like a receiving. So when he rang me back from England, I said, I'm afraid I have to tell you it was absolutely clear, a wonderful baby, and it's the most beautiful name. So he said, what is it? And I said, Melvin. He said, what? So I said, look, you don't have to take it, if it's, what are you calling him? He said, Lucas. Well, you say, go on calling him Lucas, but maybe let others, if they wish, to call him Melvin. Maybe the mother would like to. So he said, okay, I'll see, but for me, he's a Lucas. So he was ill, the baby, that's why he rang. He was actually very ill, because he called him Lucas.
He was ill because he called him Lucas?
Well, I don't know about because, but
vibration.
it was at the same time. Well, exactly, but that's another, on that level, yes. But on the outer level, he was very ill. And my daughter had said to her husband, she said, look, why don't you ask Dad to see if he can get another name? Maybe it's the name. Maybe the name is wrong. You see, that's why he rang me up in kind of feeling exasperated. So she started to call Melvin, and he started to sleep, he stopped crying, and he was great. So that's to give you an example of a name carries a vibration. And each one of us, when we have many names which carry a similar vibration, but when we are called, the right vibration, the feeling is incredible. And in 1959, I was in Nice at the airport, and Park Subub, Bapak, had come to Nice in 1959, and we'd looked after his family and so on, down in the south of France. And the planes were late, and life is wonderful because, the plane is late, people are angry, but actually it can be a wonderful thing. It was for me, because he was standing by the window like this, and he was looking out, and he had glasses, and he was just miles away, standing there. And I was next to him, and had always been uncomfortable with François. My mother called me François because she had a brother who was called Francis, who died of meningitis when he was 10 years old. And when she saw a little fair boy coming out in the world, she thought, oh great, I'll call him Francis, like this I have my boy and my brother. And I kind of carried that, and I felt heavy with it. So I saw Bapak by the window, and he was he is, I should keep him in the present because he's an extraordinary man. But he was very, very powerful in his beauty and in his quietness. And I was hesitant to come up, but I was brave, and I came up and I said, Bapak, I feel uncomfortable with my name François. Is there another name for me that, could you feel? So he looked into the distance again, and I waited and waited and waited, and then he came out with L. And I said, oh God, what have I done? He's going to call me Louis. I don't want to.
With Louis. Apologies to anyone called Louis.
Louis can be beautiful in the right place, but in the wrong place it feels weird. So it felt very weird with me, and I couldn't get rid of that Louis. So I thought, yeah, why did I ask him, because once you've asked, you engage yourself. Anyhow, this lasted quite a while, and then he was an Indonesian man. He turns around towards me. I mean, it was wonderful. He turns around and he looks at me and he said, Léonard, with the accent in the French way. And as he said that, it was an extraordinary feeling. I felt completely naked, and then it was like I was putting a coat that really fitted me, and I felt one with myself. Oh, what a wonderful feeling! Very rapidly, because the vibration of Léonard fitted with my being. So it was I had the right coat on. Wonderful. So I said, thank you, Baba. Thank you. That's thank you. And I said, what would it give me? What change is it going to bring me?
Yeah.
And he said, it'll bring you fighting spirit, like a lion.
Did it?
Oh yes. What you see in the book, I've been,
certainly got through a lot.
Yeah, there we go. That's about names, anyhow.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I was wondering I don't know if you'd like to bring up one of the juicy bits in the book to talk about to people, maybe one of the funnier bits.
Yeah, I mean, I trust you. You are the one to choose the juicy bits. The juicy bits for one are not always the juicy bits for the other. So we'll get to know you by hearing.
Well, I really enjoyed reading about your experience of your grandmother's passing.
Mm.
You were at a party,
Mm.
and it was riveting.
Mm.
You know, I have to say at this point that many of these experiences really are riveting because Léonard manages to put into words very spiritual experiences that normally I believe people can't express so clearly. And I don't know, are you comfortable to talk about
Of course.
this
Yeah, yeah.
this point?
I'm
Yeah.
comfortable because I lived it, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful to be free with it. Yes, of course.
Okay.
It's in the book because it's there.
Yeah.
I go back to the spiritual practice that we do. It's an extraordinary thing because when you start, for most people, I'll talk for myself, but for many people with whom I've talked about this, when you start, it's like if you had a third eye coming in. In other words, you go in your business, you go in your daily life and so on, but there is something that is always there, I wouldn't say watching, but being.
Within you.
Yeah, within you, being. I was reading at the time the Tibetan book about Tibet, and I thought the third eye that was quite appropriate, but that's not a very good image. It's just being. And that being, whether you go through hell in life, whether it's difficult or whether it's wonderful, there is always that presence. And that presence, since I've started this spiritual exercise, hasn't left me, but has grown. So when it came to my grandmother, I'm telling you this little bit because it fits in. We were in Tunbridge Wells with Melinda. We had a very nice house on Friend Road, and we were having a party. It was end of May, June. We were having a party at home. And we had lots of friends who had come, who practiced the same practice as us, and they were there with their children and so on. We had a table and food. And while I was taking a sandwich, it must have been about midnight, I suddenly felt my grandmother inside. Now, she had come to Tunbridge Wells, to an old people's home. She was 87. And she'd come there to see us and to be with us. But she was in an old people's home, so she wasn't in our house. And from Tunbridge Wells, from Friend Road up to London Road, where the house was quite a distance. And I felt I have to go and see her. And that's what I'm talking about, this other consciousness. It was like it received something that said, go and see your grandmother. So I listened to it. I go to Melinda and I said, darling, I'm going to see my grandmother. She said, you can't go to see grandmother now. It's 12 o'clock. The place will be all locked up, and it's an old people's homes and so on. I said, I'm sorry, but I have to go. So you keep the party, and I kissed her and I went off. And I walked down into Tunbridge Wells and up the other side, London Road, and then I came to this house. It's a beautiful old-fashioned Victorian house, and of course it was locked. So I got up on the porch, and I'm quite agile. So I looked and I knew her window was over there, so I crawled on the wall and so on. And
like you do.
yeah, like I usually do. And I lifted up the window very quietly, because I didn't want to wake up anybody, and I slipped into her room and closed the window down.
Wow.
And she was in bed, turned the other way, so she didn't see me. And I came very slowly around, and she was groaning and in real sort of feeling desperate inside. So I came round and I said, Gigi, I called her. I said, Gigi, darling, I'm here. She said, you're here? How did you get in? I said, I came in through the window. Did you? So I took her hand, and as I took her hand, I felt she was in terrific pain inside her tummy. So that spiritual practice, I put it into practice. In other words, I went quiet and I started singing. And I was singing, and as I sang, I knew it was cradling her. It was making her feeling quieter and quieter and quieter, and the pain went. And maybe for an hour or so, a long time. And then she said, I said to her, maybe you're on your way, you're going to go. Do you want me to go and fetch a priest? She said, oh, no, you stay here. So I said, do you want me to fetch a doctor and see if he can do something? She said, no, you stay here. So I stayed with her. And after a while, she said, I'd like to do a pee. I said, okay. So it was the other side. And so we turned around and I helped her to do that. And then I put her back into the bed and I sat in a chair just opposite her. And I took her hand. And I was still in that very quiet state inside. And suddenly I felt a little, some change going inside her. And I gave her a kiss and she said, I said to her, are you okay? And she said, not really. And she kind of went a little bit distant, I realized. So then I looked into her eyes. She had beautiful little blue eyes, like blue flowers. And I suddenly saw her whole life going through very, very fast. And all her emotions, feeling of love, feeling of anger, feeling of all these things coming in and out of her vision. I was living it through it, but very, very accelerated process, going backwards. Very fascinating. And then suddenly, she, while this was happening right near the end of it, she took my hand and she went ding, 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 like saying goodbye, a little sort of goodbye feeling. And then, through my body came this very sort of wave of spirituality. It was pure spirit. And it went through. And I knew it was her soul rising, coming out, leaving her body. And my hair went like this. All my hair on my body was straight. And I kind of, I gave thanks loudly, thanks to the universe for this, the beautiful way human beings are. It really is so wonderful. And I gave this terrific loud thanks. And suddenly her body went like this and like that. And then, she was off. And I put my hands and I quietened her and so on. And then I had to get out. So I thought, well, I better go and tell the nurse downstairs in the kitchen that my grandmother's died. So anyhow, the story goes, I went to tell the nurse and she was horrified I was in the house. Wanted to call the police and so on. So I said, look, come and see my grandmother. She's dead upstairs and I've got to go. I'd like to go through the door if possible. So she came out and she looked at my grandmother, and then she listened and she took the pulse and did all the things she had to do. She was a nurse, of course. And she said to me, she's dead. So I said, well, I'll come tomorrow and arrange everything. So I left her. But that was the experience. So I go home. The experience goes on. Do you want to hear more about that? Because what's interesting is that was the kind of physical part, and then there is the spiritual part, which I became aware of, this soul leaving the body, which is strong. I had it twice before with other bodies, but there we go. I walked back home, and I thought, it's a time for me to do this spiritual practice, what we call the Latihan. So everybody was deep asleep. It must have been 3 a.m. So I stand there like this, and I just let go of everything, and I feel wonderful. And I start moving and let my body move, and I start walking around. There was a sofa there, and I walked around, and I was singing quietly and feeling terribly free and happy. I walk around, and suddenly, I'm telling you this, you don't have to believe it, because the mind doesn't believe that, and I do agree, but there is the experience. I'll leave it with you. Suddenly I looked there, and 12 years before, my grandfather had died. He had poliomyelitis. What's that in English? He was paralyzed. Yeah. And he was in a wheelchair when he died. And there he was in a wheelchair on the sofa, and he was terribly angry with me, actually. He was looking. He was after he left the church, he went into the army and became a colonel, and he was very, very authoritative and so on. He had a loving side as well, but that authority was coming out, and how dare you going to see my wife like this? And he was angry about it. And I thought it was so funny to see him sitting there that I exploded in laughter. I really started laughing and laughing and laughing. And he was sitting there, and then he had a big moustache like that, and I saw his moustache start to go like this, and then suddenly he burst out laughing as well, and we both were laughing and laughing and laughing. And then I saw, and what is very funny, I saw the chair going up with him. I thought that was amazingly funny. I thought he went up, and I felt I felt whole. I felt kind of whole. Lovely. He's meeting his wife. It's lovely. So then I go upstairs, and this is the incredible bit of the story. I go upstairs. It must have been about 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Yeah, that wasn't the incredible thing. It's still to come.
I go to bed, and my wife is fast asleep, and her beautiful, cuddly, warm body. I go against her, and she said, "What happened? Is she gone?" And I said, "Yes, she's gone." And she started crying, and she cried and cried. And while I was hugging her and she was crying, I started to feel something down there, and this was really very powerful. And I said, "Hey, hang on, Léonard, what on earth are you doing? You know, we're talking about somebody dying, spirituality, and so on. And what's all that about?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. It's just come, you know." And Melinda was still crying, and it went on. It was very strong. So I said to Melinda, "Darling, could we follow this?" And she said, "What, now?" I said, "Well, what else? I mean, it's there. I didn't put it on specially, you know." She said, "You are a funny man." So we let the thing go through. And what was extraordinary is that there was just an amazing, sort of a terrific build-up. And then I saw the Milky Way, and I saw the Milky Way opening out, and I saw my grandmother and my grandfather going through the Milky Way and away. Melinda fell deep asleep, and it was a most wonderful feeling of deliverance, you know, of really delivery. There you are, you can return whole.
Somehow facilitating
You've
their
come
journey.
whole, you go back whole.
Yeah.
That's how it is, and it's beautiful. So, of course, it's hard to write a story like this, and for years I told nobody about it, like others. But then I thought maybe one should share, in truth, the realities that Park Sobu, once or twice, he said to me, "Léonard, you must share your life experiences with this Latihan." So I found the time. That's another story, how I came to write the book.
Thank you very much. Now, I have one more question, which is more general, before we open up, because now we don't have that much time, to questions from everybody here. And my question is about, it's not specifically for you in the book.
But there has been some controversy in Lewis over the last few months about Bapak writing something about not accepting homosexuality. And I'm wondering if you could tell us something about that.
Yes, of course. It's a reality. Yes? There are times, if you take our society in the Middle Ages, we used to burn people at the stake because they said something or believed in something. And each society has an evolution. And at the time, about 50, 60 years ago, when Mohammed Park Sobu came to Europe from Indonesia, he'd been brought up as a Muslim. The Muslims in Indonesia are not like the Muslims in the Arab countries. They're much freer. The women at the time were beginning to put the veil, but at the time they didn't. They were very free, but still a Muslim. And therefore, Mohammed Park Sobu, that was his religion. So when he talked, he had that language. He had the language of the Muslims at that time in Indonesia. And he talked as well from his own culture. And I suppose at that time homosexuality amongst the people in Indonesia, especially the Muslims, was not on. So once he was asked. Now, he talked a lot. He talked to us 1,500 talks, maybe more, all over the world for 30 years. And maybe once or twice, this came up, and he talked from his religion. You know, he was a man, like we all are. Although he was very holy and had a terrific understanding, he talked from there as well. So he used that language, and this came up, and somebody wrote it down and made a thing of it. Which he was not like this at all. He was the most forgiving, most loving, most extraordinary man. So it was not judgmental. It's been turned into this because it's been frozen, again with words. But that's what I can say, but to me it wasn't at all in that way. In fact, many homosexuals started at the end, and they still do. And they started with him.
That's good to know.
You know, and you know the man who brought Subud out of Indonesia was a homosexual. He's the one who actually brought it to the West. Baba trained the man for 3 years. He was a Sufi. He was called Hussein Rofi. He was in Morocco, and he was half Persian, half Belgian.
Okay.
And he was a Sufi. And this Sufi man was in Morocco, and he talked to one of his masters, and he said he wasn't quite satisfied with what he needed, something a bit deeper, something else. And his Sufi master said, if you go to Indonesia, Jakarta, there might be something for you there. So he went to Indonesia, but he was gay. He went to Indonesia, and Mohammed Baksu, many years before, had an experience where he knew that it wasn't him to bring out to the world this facility, because that's what he did, the contact. It wasn't him to bring it up, but it was for somebody who came to him to take it out of Indonesia. So, to make money, he was an ordinary man, a Baba, and he learned to be an accountant. So he was in his garage, and he was doing accountancy for different people and so on. He was working there. And one day he saw this man coming out. And this man was Hussein Rofi looking for he didn't know who. And he came up and he said, I'm looking for somebody who can give me this and that. And he explained. And Baba, when he saw him, he said, you're the man I saw 15 years ago. Oh, wonderful, you found your way here. And he was the guy. So he kept him for 3 years, and they did Latihan there, and the spiritual practice together, and so on. And then he said, you can go. So he went to Hong Kong. He was a linguist. He knew 18, 20 languages very well. He was an amazing man. But he was homosexual. You know, and that really shows it's been misunderstood and printed, and it's there forever. It's really not part of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm aware of the time. I think we have the room till 6. So if anyone has any questions to ask Léonard, now is a good time. This lady here.
Thank you very much. That was a very inspiring talk. You talked about the soul and your kind of soul leaving, and you say that you don't follow a God or a Christian. Where do you? How does the soul fit into your practice, and where does the soul go?
Okay. Strangely enough, and people are often surprised when I say I don't believe. I'm not a believer. I like going, because I'm so rational, I like to go by what I know. I know that if I put my finger in there, oops, it's wet. Okay? That's, I know for sure. Somebody said to me, your finger is not wet. I said, well, that's your problem. It's wet. Right. So I'm very rational. When I came, my consciousness came to go to a place in myself where there was space, there was full awareness, but there was no ego, no heart, no mind mixed in. And I felt this very pure feeling inside. At the beginning, I never would call it soul, because to me the soul is like a container. And it contains the vibration of life. If your consciousness goes into there, it actually benefits, and then you can follow this initial program that we have received, all of us. So it's many years later, maybe it's only for the last 10 years I've used that word, because I've understood what it means for me. You know. So when I use the word soul, it's like a vessel. And my grandmother left her body, because a vessel can't take too much weight, left her body and went in that vessel, which took her back. And she stopped on the way to pick up my grandfather.
You've been waiting around.
Yeah, but to me the word soul, but let's keep that word very loud, because different religions have different understanding of that word. And what's beautiful about Subud is that
it's all before the word. If we base things on the word, we have wars. If we base it on our spiritual understanding, there is nothing but love and kindness. Simple.
Nicola?
Yeah. It's very interesting when you were referring to the baby, and in observing you, there's a lot of movement seems to be very, very important, and singing. And also, quite apart from that, although you say the word is not important, you chose. So I'm interested in the movement of words.
It's important to communicate, but it's not important it's in the way of your spirituality. Because beingness needs no words. And there is a whole world outside there where you do not need consciousness, you need awareness, but the word is only down here to communicate.
Well, I think the word is our humanity. I think the word, the language, is what differentiates us from the animal world. I very much respect the animal.
You're correct. You're correct. You think, and words are in the thinking. But I'm talking about an experience which is beyond the thinking.
Absolutely, but words can convey a lot of spirituality. I mean,
Well, that's what I'm using here with you.
You're very eloquent.
Well, thank you very much. But you've got good hearing as well, because you heard what I said. I'm very pleased that you picked up about the baby, because to me, that baby is fully conscious and radiant. It's sublime. It's so precious. And it hasn't got words, yet it expresses comfort or discomfort and so on. It's all there. Now, I'm not saying that as adults we should become babies, but I'm saying that let's pick up this initial program within each one of us, and let it unfold. And I've discovered my world has gone wider and wider and wider and wider, but not through words, through consciousness.
That's why I think dance is so important.
Well, in this Latihan, we dance.
Beautiful.
We dance, I do dances from all over the world. Because you're not taught how to dance. I was in Africa, I was dancing in Africa.
Beautiful.
And it comes, it's all programmed within us. In fact, each one of us here has all the colors of humanity inside ourselves. And this Latihan is the training, and it trains you to allow this to come out. So when you travel, you find that everybody, brothers and sisters, you feel one. Because you know how they feel from inside. And I've experienced that in Japan, in Russia, in Africa, in my different journeys. So, it is wonderful.
And in fact, your experience of your grandparents, to me, was wholeness. There was the circle was complete. And this is where the word holy surely comes from, to be whole.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear you sing.
Yeah.
It's not time. There might be time.
There's some books.
Maybe we can all sing. You could lead us. You could lead us. And
No, I couldn't lead us. I couldn't lead you because that's the whole point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you very much. There's no leader. It's what's so incredible. Is that the leader is within each of you. And you will find your leader by trusting the letting go. So the more you can let go, you'll find that inside you there is a most miraculous program. And if you practice that letting go, you start by moving, by dancing, free your body, freeing your voice. And I found myself in the last 3 months maybe, when I was doing my spiritual practice, 2 or 3 times, I found myself praying. Once it was in Japanese. There was somebody with me in the room.
And do you speak Japanese?
No, not at all. But I was singing it. And it was a prayer. And he said to me, you were praying, weren't you? I said, yes, I was praying. He said, what were you saying? So I said, well, you didn't understand because it was Japanese. But I was asking that each word that comes out of my mouth, may it be heard and resonates into the listeners. So that each person who listens to my words can actually understand them inside themselves. So I found this was something that came out. So I followed it, so I'm happy with what I'm saying.
I can't see anyone else's hand.
This is dichotomy.
Oh, sorry. Yours is...
My girlfriend said it can be quite shy. I have a really question. It's something that I want to do in my lifetime. And it's not endangered, because some people do put bad things on. And I was saying, if I want to be a nice man in my lifetime, I can listen to people what they say. So when you said about your grandfather, that he died and you saw him when he was dead, I want to believe that. But my dad was saying, why would you believe something?
Yes.
But I
Don't believe
want
it. No, don't believe it. But maybe one day you will experience something like
But
this.
I really want to believe.
Well, you can believe it as well. You're free. And in fact, at your age, it's much easier. It's much easier to be connected because you're still very connected to your sincerity inside. In fact, we all had it. So that sincerity connects you to it. So you're free. That's quite right. You can believe it. Quite safe. Quite safe.
Okay,
I've got one more.
well, Nicola, I think we
okay.
have to wrap up now and leave. I'm getting a signal that from the angle. So thank you ever so much for coming. Thank you, Léonard. And Léonard does have copies of this book available to buy, and he will sign it for you if you'd like to buy it this evening.
Where are they?
At that table there.
They're here. And they're a bargain at £10 each. Only £10.
Wow, yeah.
Thank you, Leonard.